I pulled into Pearl's driveway, the familiar scent of her famous pot roast wafting through the cracked window. Greg shifted in the passenger seat, his brow furrowed as he checked his phone one last time before pocketing it. "Everything okay, dear?" I asked, placing a hand on his arm. He forced a smile. "Just work stuff. You know how it is." We made our way to the front door, and Pearl greeted us with a wide grin. "Judith, dear, you're looking a bit thin. I made your favorite pot roast. You should eat a lot. You could use some more energy." Her words stung, as they often did, but I smiled and thanked her. Greg gave me a sympathetic glance as we followed her inside. The kids bounded in, their laughter filling the house. "Why don't you go check on them?" Greg suggested. "I'll help your mother with dinner." I nodded and headed upstairs, my footsteps slowing as I neared the kitchen. Pearl's hushed voice drifted out. "She still doesn't suspect anything?" A chill ran down my spine. Greg's muffled response was indistinct, but the tension in Pearl's tone made my heart race. What secret were they hiding? I tiptoed closer, straining to hear more, but their voices dropped to whispers. Swallowing hard, I forced myself to turn away and join the kids in the playroom, plastering on a smile. Throughout dinner, Greg and Pearl exchanged furtive glances, their conversation stilted. I picked at my food, my appetite gone. "Is everything all right, dear?" Pearl asked, her eyes narrowing. "You've hardly touched your plate." "Just feeling a bit under the weather," I lied, forcing a bite of the dry pot roast down my throat. Greg reached over and squeezed my hand, his thumb rubbing circles on my skin. A gesture of comfort, or an attempt to placate me? My mind raced with possibilities, each more unsettling than the last. After we'd said our goodbyes and buckled the kids into the car, Greg turned to me, his expression unreadable. "You've been awfully quiet tonight. Is something bothering you?" I opened my mouth, the words poised on my tongue, but something held me back. Pursing my lips, I shook my head. "Just tired, I guess." He studied me for a moment, then nodded, seeming to accept my excuse as we pulled out of the driveway. But as we drove home in silence, my thoughts churned. What were Greg and Pearl hiding from me? And why did I have the sinking feeling that my life was about to change in ways I couldn't yet imagine? The next few days passed in a blur of unease. Greg's behavior grew increasingly evasive, his once warm demeanor replaced by a cool detachment. Whenever I tried to engage him in conversation, he'd brush me off with a distracted "uh-huh" or "we'll talk later." My mind kept drifting back to that whispered exchange between him and Pearl. What were they hiding from me? The thought gnawed at me, making it impossible to focus on anything else. One afternoon, while Greg was at work, I decided to do a little investigating of my own. I knew it was a violation of his privacy, but the knot of dread in my stomach left me no choice. I had to find out what was going on. I started in the home office, methodically sifting through the cluttered desk drawers. At first, there was nothing out of the ordinary, just old bills, instruction manuals, and a jumble of pens and paper clips. But then, tucked beneath a stack of folders, I spotted something. A small, leather-bound journal. My heart pounding, I pulled it out and flipped through the pages. The entries were sparse, written in Greg's familiar scrawl, but what I read made my blood run cold. "Met with the estate planner today about selling the old Prescott property behind Judith's back. Pearl agrees this is the best way to secure our future without Judith getting in the way. Once I have the money from the sale, I can finally retire and be rid of that dead weight." The journal slipped from my trembling hands as the full weight of Greg's deception crashed over me. He was planning to leave me, to take everything we'd built together and discard me like garbage. And Pearl, my own mother-in-law, was in on it. Hot tears stung my eyes as a wave of nausea washed over me. How could they do this to me, after everything I'd sacrificed for this family? I forced myself to take a deep breath, then another. I couldn't confront Greg yet. Not until I had more evidence. But one thing was certain. I wouldn't go down without a fight. Over the next few weeks, I pored over our financial records, scouring old documents and statements for any sign of foul play. And sure enough, I found it. A trail of suspicious transactions and meetings, all pointing to Greg's elaborate scheme. With each new discovery, my anger and determination grew. He thought he could cast me aside like an old rag? Well, he was going to learn just how wrong he was. I knew I needed an ally, someone I could trust implicitly. That's when I thought of Carol. My oldest and dearest friend had been through the ringer herself after her husband's death. If anyone could understand what I was going through, it was her. I waited until Greg was out playing golf, then slipped over to Carol's place, the damning evidence tucked safely in my bag. As I spilled everything to her, I could see the rage simmering behind her eyes. "That snake," she hissed when I'd finished. "Don't you worry, Judith. We're going to take care of this, once and for all. Greg and that wretched mother of his won't know what hit them." A grim smile tugged at my lips. For the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of hope. Greg and Pearl might think they had me cornered, but they were about to learn just how formidable a woman scorned could be. With Carol's help, I spent the next few weeks meticulously gathering evidence of Greg and Pearl's deception. We pored over bank statements, investment records, anything that could shed light on their underhanded scheme. What we uncovered was a tangled web of lies and manipulation. Greg had been siphoning money from our joint accounts into a secret slush fund, no doubt to finance his grand retirement plans without me. And Pearl, that conniving snake, was aiding and abetting him every step of the way. But that wasn't even the worst of it. As we dug deeper, we realized their betrayal ran far deeper than just money. They'd been actively working to undermine me, to strip me of any power or agency within my own family. It started small at first. Greg forgetting to include me on important financial decisions, Pearl making snide comments about my supposed inability to handle such matters. But soon their tactics grew bolder. "Judith, dear, don't you think it's time we looked into selling the old Prescott place?" Pearl said one evening over dinner, her tone sickly sweet. "It's just sitting there, gathering dust. We could use the money for something more practical." I felt Greg's eyes boring into me, daring me to object. The Prescott property had been in my family for generations, passed down from my grandparents. It was my most prized possession, a piece of my heritage that money couldn't buy. I'm not sure that's a good idea," I stammered, my heart pounding. "That land means a lot to me." Pearl's face hardened. "Don't be so sentimental, dear. It's just an old plot of land. Surely you can see the sense in liquidating it." I opened my mouth to protest further, but Greg cut me off. "Mother's right, Judith. We should consider all our options here. Don't you want what's best for the family?" His words hung in the air, heavy with implication. I knew then that I was fighting a losing battle, at least for the moment. So I forced a tight smile and nodded, bile rising in my throat. Moments like that became increasingly common in the weeks that followed. Every time I tried to assert myself, to make my voice heard, Greg and Pearl were there to shut me down, to remind me of my supposed inadequacies. But I refused to be cowed, refused to let them break me. With each new slight, each backhanded insult, my resolve only hardened. They wanted to take everything from me? Fine. But I wouldn't go down without one hell of a fight. Carol and I began documenting every interaction, every underhanded comment or financial slight. We compiled a dossier of evidence that would make even the most hardened lawyer blush. "You're doing the right thing, you know," Carol said one afternoon as we pored over the latest batch of damning documents. "Greg and that wretched mother of his, they're going to get what's coming to them." I nodded, my jaw set. "They've underestimated me for far too long. It's time I show them just how strong I really am." With the evidence mounting and my anger simmering, I knew the time for confrontation was drawing near. Greg and Pearl thought they could cast me aside like an unwanted burden? Well, they were about to learn a brutal lesson in just how wrong they were. I was done being the meek, obedient wife. It was time to fight for what was mine, and God help anyone who stood in my way. The next Sunday dinner at Pearl's house was a tense affair. Greg and I picked at our food in silence, the weight of unspoken accusations hanging heavy in the air. Pearl, ever the gracious hostess, kept up a stream of forced small talk, but her eyes kept darting between us, sensing the undercurrent of tension. As the meal dragged on, I found myself growing bolder, the anger simmering just beneath the surface. Enough was enough. It was time to call their bluff. "You know, Greg," I said, keeping my tone light, "I was thinking the other day about how we haven't really invested in our marriage lately." I met his gaze, holding it firmly. "Maybe we should look into that instead of taking on new projects." His fork stilled, and I saw the briefest flicker of unease cross his features before the mask slipped back into place. "What did you have in mind, dear?" I shrugged, feigning nonchalance. "Oh, I don't know. A weekend getaway, just the two of us? Some quality time to reconnect?" My eyes bored into his, letting the implication hang in the air. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Pearl shift in her seat, her lips pressed into a thin line. She knew I was baiting them, probing for weakness in their carefully constructed facade. Greg let out a strained chuckle. That's a lovely idea, Judith, but you know how busy work has been lately. Maybe once things settle down a bit. Of course, I said smoothly, hiding my smirk behind a sip of wine. We wouldn't want to disrupt any of your special projects after all. Pearl's fork clattered against her plate, the sound jarring in the tense silence. Well, I for one think it's an excellent idea. She cut in, her voice overly bright. You two have been so distant lately. A little romantic getaway could be just the thing to rekindle that spark, don't you think? Her eyes slid towards Greg, a silent challenge. He met her gaze for a beat, then cleared his throat. You're probably right, Mother. We'll have to look into that. I hid my triumphant smile behind another sip of wine. They were rattled, that much was clear. Good. Let them stew in their guilt and uncertainty for a while. The rest of the dinner passed in much the same way, with me dropping not-so-subtle hints about my growing awareness of their schemes. Greg and Pearl grew increasingly flustered, their bravado cracking with each barbed comment. Finally, as we were preparing to leave, I pulled Greg aside under the guise of helping him with his coat. You know, I've been doing some thinking lately, I murmured, keeping my voice low. About our finances, future plans. He stiffened, but didn't quite meet my eyes. Oh, what about them? Just that I want to be more involved, I said, injecting a note of steely resolve into my tone. After all, we're partners in this marriage, aren't we? It's only fair that I have a say. For a moment, Greg's mask slipped, and I saw the briefest flash of panic cross his features. Then, just as quickly, it was gone, replaced by his usual smooth indifference. Of course, dear, he said, forcing a tight smile. We'll discuss it more later, I nodded, returning his smile with one of my own. I'll be looking forward to it. As we pulled out of the driveway, I could feel the weight of Greg's gaze boring into the back of my head. Let him wonder, let him squirm. The game was afoot, and this time I held all the cards. After that tense family dinner, I knew I needed reinforcements. As much as I hated to admit it, taking on Greg and Pearl alone would be an uphill battle. I needed an ally, someone with a keen eye and a loyalty that couldn't be shaken. That's when I thought of Carol. My oldest and dearest friend had been through hell and back after losing her husband, but she'd emerged from it all with a strength and resilience that was nothing short of inspiring. If anyone could understand what I was going through, it was her. I wasted no time in filling her in on the sordid details over a bottle of wine. As I spilled everything, Greg's deception, Pearl's twisted machinations, the evidence I'd gathered, I saw the rage simmering behind Carol's eyes. That snake, she hissed when I'd finished, slamming her glass down with enough force to slosh wine across the table. Don't you worry, Judith. We're going to take care of this once and for all. Greg and that wretched mother of his won't know what hit them. A grim smile tugged at my lips. With Carol in my corner, I felt a surge of confidence, of righteous determination. Greg and Pearl might think they had me cornered, but they were about to learn just how formidable a woman scorned could be. Over the next few weeks, Carol became my eyes and ears, tailing Greg's every move while I kept up appearances at home. It wasn't long before she uncovered a damning piece of evidence. Greg had been meeting regularly with an estate planner, no doubt plotting to sell off my family's most prized possession behind my back. He's got no shame, that one, Carol spat as she filled me in, her voice a low hiss of fury. Thinks he can just strip you of everything you hold dear and toss you aside like yesterday's garbage. My hands clenched into white-knuckled fists at the thought. The Prescott property had been in my family for generations, a piece of my heritage that money couldn't buy. And Greg was going to sell it out from under me to fund his grand retirement scheme? Over my dead body. With each new revelation, each fresh betrayal that Carol brought to light, my anger burned hotter, a simmering rage that threatened to consume me. But I forced myself to stay calm, to channel that fury into a razor-sharp focus. I would have my revenge, but it would be exacted with surgical precision, not blind emotion. As the weeks ticked by, Carol and I compiled a dossier of evidence that would make any lawyer weep. Recorded conversations, financial records, even grainy photographs of Greg's clandestine meetings. We built an airtight case, leaving no stone unturned, no angle unexplored. All the while, I kept up the facade at home, playing the oblivious wife to throw Greg and Pearl off the scent. It wasn't easy, maintaining that mask of ignorance when every fiber of my being screamed for retribution. But I was a master at deception now, lulling them into a false sense of security with each passing day. Finally, when our preparations were complete, when the noose of evidence had tightened to an inescapable degree, I knew it was time to spring the trap. Greg and Pearl thought they could bleed me dry, could strip me of everything I held dear. Well, they were about to learn just how devastating a miscalculation that was. I would have my revenge, and by the time the dust settled, they would be the ones left with nothing. With our trap set and the evidence compiled, it was time to move in for the kill. Carol and I decided to lure Greg and Pearl to the one place they'd never expect, my childhood home, the very property they'd been scheming to sell out from under me. "Wouldn't it be nice to go back there?" I said one evening over dinner, injecting a forced cheerfulness into my tone. "Make some more memories before any drastic changes happen." I saw Greg stiffen, his fork stilling halfway to his mouth. Out of the corner of my eye, Pearl shifted in her seat, her lips pressed into a thin line. They knew I was baiting them, that much was clear. But they had no idea just how tightly the noose had tightened around their necks. "That's a lovely idea, dear," Greg said at last, his voice carefully neutral. "We'll have to plan something soon." The smug satisfaction in his tone made my blood boil. He thought he had me fooled, that I was still the oblivious little wife blindly going along with his schemes. Well, he was in for a rude awakening. A few days later, we made the trip out to the old Prescott property, the place where I'd spent my happiest childhood days. As we pulled up the long, winding drive, memories came flooding back, climbing the ancient oak tree, chasing fireflies through the fields at dusk, the endless summers that seemed to stretch on forever. "Isn't this place just beautiful?" I said, spreading my arms wide as we stepped out of the car. "I have so many wonderful memories here." Greg cleared his throat, suddenly looking ill at ease. "Yes, well, about that, Judith." I turned to face him, my expression one of studied innocence. "Was there something you wanted to tell me, Greg?" He opened his mouth, then closed it again, his eyes sliding towards Pearl. She gave him the barest of nods, her jaw set in a hard line. Finally, Greg seemed to find his voice. "We've been discussing the possibility of selling this property. For the assets, you understand." There it was, the truth laid bare at last. I felt a surge of vindictive satisfaction, knowing that the trap had been sprung. Keeping my expression carefully neutral, I met his gaze steadily. "Is that so? And when exactly were you planning on discussing this with me?" Greg shifted uncomfortably, his eyes dropping to the ground. "We didn't want to worry you unnecessarily until you'd already made up your minds, you mean?" I cut him off, my voice deceptively mild. "Until you'd gone ahead and sold off a piece of my family's legacy without so much as a by your leave?" Silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. Greg opened his mouth, no doubt to spew more excuses and lies, but I held up a hand to stop him. "Save it, Greg. The jig is up." With those words, I pulled out the damning dossier Carol and I had compiled. Photos, recordings, like reams of financial documents laying out their betrayal in stark, irrefutable detail. As the evidence piled up at their feet, I saw the blood drain from Greg's face, leaving him ashen and shaken. You've been watching us? Investigating us this whole time?" His voice cracked with a combination of rage and disbelief. I shrugged, feigning nonchalance. "I had to know what I was dealing with, didn't I? And let's just say the truth is illuminating." Pearl stepped forward then, her face contorted in a mask of fury. "You lying, conniving little—" "Don't!" My voice lashed out like a whip, stopping her in her tracks. "Don't try to play the victim here, Pearl. You're just as guilty as your son in all of this." I turned my gaze to Greg, holding it with every ounce of strength I possessed. "You thought you could cut me out, leave me with nothing while you lived out your golden years on my family's dime? You underestimated me, Greg. Both of you did." My hands clenched into white-knuckled fists as the rage I'd been holding back finally broke free. "Well, let me make one thing crystal clear. I won't be the one left with nothing when this is all over. You can bet your miserable lives on that." As the words left my lips, I felt a surge of power, of righteous vindication. The game was over, the deception laid bare. Greg and Pearl had made their bed, and now it was time for them to lie in it. They wanted a war? They were about to get one. And by the time the dust settled, they'd be the ones left broken and destitute. Not me. Not this time. The look of stunned disbelief on Greg and Pearl's faces would have been almost comical if the situation weren't so deadly serious. As the weight of the evidence I'd gathered settled around them, realization seemed to dawn in their eyes. The game was up, the deception laid bare. "You've been watching us this whole time?" Greg sputtered, his face mottled with rage. Investigating us behind our backs? I met his gaze steadily, refusing to be cowed. I had to know what I was up against, didn't I? And let me tell you, the truth is illuminating. Pearl stepped forward then, her eyes blazing with fury. You lying, conniving little... Don't. The word cracked like a whip, stopping her in her tracks. Don't try to play the victim here, Pearl. You're just as guilty as your son in all of this. I turned my attention back to Greg, holding his stricken gaze with every ounce of strength I possessed. You thought you could cut me out, leave me with nothing while you lived out your golden years on my family's dime? You underestimated me, Greg. Both of you did. My hands clenched into white-knuckled fists as the rage I'd been holding back finally broke free. Well, let me make one thing crystal clear. I won't be the one left with nothing when this is all over. You can bet your miserable lives on that. An uneasy silence fell over the group, thick and suffocating. Greg opened his mouth, no doubt to spew more lies and excuses, but I cut him off with a sharp gesture. Save it. I'm done listening to your silver-tongued deceptions. I turned to face the small crowd of family and friends Carol had gathered as witnesses. These two snakes thought they could bleed me dry, strip me of everything I hold dear without a second thought. Well, now the whole world gets to see them for what they really are, a pair of greedy, manipulative cowards. One by one, I laid out the evidence, the recorded conversations, the paper trail of financial treachery, everything Carol and I had so meticulously compiled. With each new revelation, I saw the horror and disgust ripple through the crowd, the realization sinking in that this went far beyond a simple family dispute. By the time I'd finished, Greg and Pearl stood exposed, their reputations in tatters. Greg's head was bowed, his shoulders slumped in defeat, while Pearl alternated between fits of rage and desperate, wheedling pleas for understanding. I looked at them both, feeling a surge of power, of righteous vindication. After everything they'd put me through, all the lies and betrayal, they were finally getting what they deserved. You see, I said, addressing the crowd once more. This is what happens when greed and selfishness are allowed to fester. This is what family means to people like them. I shook my head, my lip curling in disgust. Well, I for one have had enough. Turning to face Greg and Pearl, I drew myself up to my full height, steadying my voice. Our marriage is over. I want nothing more to do with either of you. The words hung in the air, heavy and damning. For a long moment, Greg and Pearl simply stared at me, dumbstruck. Then, finally, Greg seemed to find his voice. Judith, please, he croaked, reaching out a hand in a pleading gesture. We can work through this, fix what's been broken. But I was already shaking my head, my mind made up. It's too late for that, Greg. You made your choices, and now you have to live with them. I looked at him, at the man I'd once loved, and felt nothing but a hollow emptiness. I'm taking back what's mine, my money, my property, my dignity, and when I walk away from here, you'll never see me again. As the words left my lips, I felt a profound sense of peace settle over me. The shackles of my marriage had been broken. The weight of Greg and Pearl's betrayal finally lifted from my shoulders. I was free to live my life on my own terms without their toxic influence dragging me down. Greg opened his mouth again, but I didn't stick around to hear whatever desperate pleas he had left. Turning on my heel, I strode away from the wreckage of my old life, Carol falling into step beside me with a proud smile. A new chapter was beginning, one forged in the fires of hardship and deception. And this time, I would be the one holding the pen. The weeks following my explosive confrontation with Greg and Pearl were a whirlwind. Lawyers were called, assets were divided, and the once unbreakable bonds of family were severed with a few strokes of a pen. Through it all, Carol was by my side, her steady presence and sage advice keeping me grounded amidst the chaos. As the dust settled and I finally extricated myself from the wreckage of my marriage, she was the one constant, the reminder that I didn't have to go through this alone. You did the right thing, you know, she said one evening over glasses of wine, her eyes shining with a mixture of pride and compassion. Greg and that viper of a mother-in-law, they never deserved you. I managed a wan smile, tracing the rim of my glass with one finger. I know. Doesn't make it any easier, though. Carol reached across the table, covering my hand with her own. Of course not, honey. But you're free now, free to live your life on your own terms without their toxicity dragging you down. Those words resonated deep within me, sparking a flicker of hope amidst the grief and anger. She was right. I was free, liberated from the shackles of a marriage built on lies and betrayal. The path ahead was uncertain, but it was mine to forge, unencumbered by Greg and Pearl's poisonous influence. In the end, I walked away with more than just my share of the assets. The Prescott property, that beloved piece of my family's legacy, remained safely in my possession, untouched by Greg's greed. Petty revenge, or a hard-won victory? I preferred to see it as the latter. As for Greg and Pearl, well, let's just say the aftermath of their deception wasn't pretty. Word of their treachery spread like wildfire, and before long they found themselves social pariahs, shunned by the very circles they'd once moved so comfortably within. Greg's business prospects withered on the vine as clients and investors pulled their support, leaving him a shell of his former self. Pearl fared little better. Forced to downsize from her palatial home, she became a recluse, her once vibrant social life reduced to bitter monologues over lukewarm tea. The mother-son duo that had once seemed so unstoppable was now little more than a cautionary tale, a living embodiment of the consequences that come with unchecked greed and manipulation. Through it all, I refused to gloat or revel in their downfall. Satisfying as it was to see them reap what they'd sown, I knew dwelling on it would only poison my own chance at happiness. There would be no more energy wasted on Greg and Pearl. That chapter of my life was over, forever closed. Instead, I turned my focus to new horizons, to building the life I'd always dreamed of but been too afraid to pursue. With Carol by my side, we made the decision to leave the city behind, trading the noise and grime for a small, picturesque town where the air was fresh and the people were warm. It was there, in that idyllic little hamlet, that we opened our boutique, a charming little shop filled with artisanal crafts and locally sourced treasures. From the moment we hung that open sign, it felt like coming home, like stepping into the life I was always meant to lead. "Here's to new chapters," Carol said on our opening day, raising a glass of crisp white wine. "Our best decisions always come from our worst situations, don't they?" I clinked my glass against hers, a genuine smile spreading across my face. "They certainly do, my friend. They certainly do." As I looked around at the beautiful space we'd created, at the promise of new adventures and second chances, I felt a profound sense of peace settle over me. The road ahead was uncharted, full of twists and turns I couldn't yet foresee. But one thing was certain. Whatever came next, I would face it on my own terms, beholden to no one but myself. Greg and Pearl's betrayal had been the catalyst for a total life reset, a chance to shed the dead weight of a toxic relationship and start anew. And I had no intention of squandering that gift. This was my life now, my chance to finally live it to the fullest. And live it I would, with open arms and an open heart, embracing every moment as it came.